We'll call our meeting to order tonight. Renata, if you do the roll call, please.
Evans?
Here.
Eddinger? McEvers?
Here.
Gukin?
Yes.
Miller?
Here.
English?
Here.
So we're going to start off tonight. We have a workshop, and this workshop is going to be on the Health Corridor Vision and Eligibility Report. And I'm going to recuse myself on this issue and turn it over to Council President McEvers. It's all yours.
Thank you. We have a presentation from a bunch of folks that are going to talk about this. This is kind of the first time we've been able to hear anything from the folks that are proposing this. So looks like Hillary, you're going to start off. So welcome.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you more about the health corridor and kind of what's been going on up there. This is really a request from you. I was before you on June 19th of this year and had talked about the possibility of doing eligibility reports for both the health corridor and for East Sherman. And as you recall, there was kind of a split vote, and so then the new motion was to have some workshops to really kind of get more into what is the vision, what's the future development, and what does it look like if we wanted to do an eligibility report. And so that is why I am here before you this evening and why we have some other speakers that will be talking to you about the health corridor and the work that's been done to date. And so the agenda that's here on the screen kind of shows you how we're going to be covering the material this evening. So after me, John Ness, CEO of Kootenai Health, will talk about Kootenai Health and kind of the background, what they've been doing, what is their future vision for development, and some of their master planning efforts. Then Mike Kennedy, who is the chairman of CDA 2030, will talk about why is CDA 2030 involved and the work that has been done by the Urban Land Institute. There was a technical advisory panel that was brought in to evaluate the corridor and came up with some recommendations. And then I'll conclude with kind of the next steps. What's the timing, the process? If we do an eligibility report, what does that look like? And then the Q&A. And as I had talked to Council President McEvers, if there's burning questions along the way, we could answer those, but it would be probably better if we could get through the presentations and then have the Q&A, and we can have the whole panel kind of come up and speak to that. We also have some other guests in the audience that are available to answer some questions. So Police Chief White is here, I know. I think we have Brad Marshall from JUB Engineers that's available to answer questions related to some of the transportation studies that have been done in the area. Chris Bosley, our city engineer, is here, and then there's some employees from Kootenai Health and other CDA 2030 representatives. So I think we have everyone here to help answer your questions. The map that's here on the screen, this is the same boundaries as what you saw in June, but it's just, we tried to make it a little clearer and allow you to see the roadways on that. So I'll show you the boundaries are here in green, which might be a little hard to see on the screen, but it kind of follows this boundary generally here. There is an area here that has a crosshatch, and what's indicated by the yellow line is the Lake District boundaries. And so there is a possible overlap, and there had been some discussion that maybe there could be a de-annexation of the Lake District if this ever does become a renewal. Because some of the development that's primed to happen in here, the timing may be that it's not within that 2021 timeframe before that district expires. That's why there's an overlap. And then it continues here kind of along the Davidson Avenue, up Government Way, along I-90, and then it does go up toward Apple Way, and then kind of back down and around. And then the health corridor is outlined here with the little dotted lines, and that is a smaller percentage of the area. I think it's 30% of the mapped area, so I can double check that. Yes, so 30% of the map boundary is the Kootenai Health area, and the map itself is approximately 281 acres. And as we talked about last time, this is kind of just a large area. It can always be shrunk down, but in comparison, the Lake District is 671 acres, and the River District is 307. So this is smaller than both of those, even though it looks quite large. So with that, I will hand it over to John Ness to talk about Kootenai Health and their efforts.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you very much, Council, for the opportunity to speak with you tonight about our growing healthcare corridor. So I think probably the best place to start is to actually go back in time. And this in many ways is a long developing success story for our community. And just to give you an idea of how long this development and growth has been occurring, in 1964, John Richards Sr. was the chairman of the Kootenai Hospital District Board, and he had a very controversial idea. And the idea was to move the hospital from downtown Coeur d'Alene all the way out to the intersection of Interstate 90 and US 95. And if you go back and you look at the newspaper from that era, what you would see is a series of letters to the editor debating that strategy and all the pros and cons of it. Ultimately, the hospital district board prevailed, and they purchased the property at that intersection. And as the current CEO of Kootenai Health, I'll tell you that that was one of the wisest decisions that this community has made, because to have a growing hospital at the intersection of I-90 and US 95 is actually the best possible location we could find. The challenge we have, and this is probably surprising at this point, is that we're outgrowing the site. And I think if those board members were here, they would be both pleased and surprised to hear that. So 52 years ago, the community made a decision to build Kootenai Memorial Hospital on that location, and we've been growing ever since. And so I want to kind of share with you some of the milestone events that have occurred, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move past the rest of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and get right to more current period. So, as many of you remember, 2007 to 2009, kind of a tough economic time for this community and many other communities. And at that time, this is prior to my arrival, the Kootenai Health Board made a decision to put a halt to all building projects and expansion plans. And this was a period of very high unemployment, limited growth in the community, not much construction. And so for a period of time, this hospital was not growing and didn't have the space and the commitment to do that. And the following year, 2010, Joe Morris retired. And so a leader that had been there for over 3 decades stepped aside. I came on board to this wonderful community, great community-owned hospital, and we decided, along with the administrative team and the board, to step back and really spend some time analyzing where we were going to go as a community hospital. And so we put together our strategic plan, did a lot of analysis, and what we discovered in our analysis was interesting. And the conclusion was that many of the residents of North Idaho were leapfrogging right past Kootenai, at the time, Kootenai Medical Center, to receive their health care in Spokane hospitals. And when we looked at the detail of the predominant reasons that this had been occurring, some of it, of course, is the perception that bigger is better. Some of it was perceptions of higher quality, even though today I'm pleased to say that the highest rated hospital in terms of quality and patient safety in North Idaho and Eastern Washington is Kootenai Health. But the predominant reason for this occurring was we had a huge doctor shortage. We did not have enough physicians to meet the needs of those residents, so patients were traveling to Spokane to see doctors, and ultimately they were hospitalized there. Plus, we lacked certain physician specialties. And therefore, a huge driver for the Kootenai Hospital Board was we had to add physicians, we had to expand services, and we had to renew our commitment with the feeling that the best care is care closest to home. And so we then put together this plan, and the first project that we undertook was we did about a 50,000 square foot expansion with our partners at Parkwood Business Properties of the Interlake office building. In that building, we then made a commitment to a family medicine residency program to train new physicians with the hope that they would stay in our community and serve our patients. We also recruited other physicians to occupy that building, and within less than 12 months, that building was completely full. So then we went to 2014, and we also had discovered that many of the new moms that were delivering babies were actually delivering those babies in Spokane hospitals. And in part, it's because we had no neonatal intensive care unit. And so we made a commitment to build a 100,000 square foot expansion of our main campus. And on the first floor of that now is a state-of-the-art family birth center with a neonatal intensive care unit with neonatologists. And this year we'll set an all-time record for the most births in Kootenai County. And moms are staying closer to home, and we're able to treat more patients. That is the same year that Kootenai Health became a member of the Mayo Clinic Care Network. And even to this day, Kootenai Health is the only hospital in the Pacific Northwest that is a member of the Mayo Clinic Care Network, which has helped us recruit more physicians to our community because they hold that designation in high regard. So many of these strategies are about recruiting physicians to our community. So that project was completed on schedule, under budget, and then we prepared for the next phase, which is we did an expansion of our Post Falls Health Park building, once again to add more physicians to our community. And so we added 22,000 square feet there. We then, in 2017, started what we call Phase 2. And Phase 2 includes a significant expansion of our emergency department and our main operating room and other departments within the hospital. Prior to this expansion, our emergency department was the single busiest emergency department from the Canadian border down to Boise. We were seeing 50,000 patient visits a year in an emergency department that was designed for 32,000 patient visits a year. That project is now complete, and we have 11 new treatment rooms, state-of-the-art emergency department. And we also became designated as a trauma center by the American College of Surgeons. So many of the patients we see in the emergency department are not from Kootenai County, but from outlying communities within the broader region. And also as part of Phase 2, we expanded our main operating room, and we now have state-of-the-art operating room facilities, which helps us recruit surgeons to our medical staff. 2017 is also the year that we worked with Department of Transportation, City of Coeur d'Alene, and others to do some improvements on Ironwood Drive, because as the medical community has grown, the traffic count on both US 95 and Ironwood Drive continues to go up. And those roadways weren't designed for the volume of traffic that we're currently seeing. And this year, we started Phase 3. And there were always 3 phases to this master facility plan. And Phase 3 involves the development of a new inpatient cancer unit and inpatient neurology services. And as a result of that, we've just added 2 more medical oncologists and continue to recruit more neurologists. And as physicians come here, they're looking for state-of-the-art facilities, technology, and of course a wonderful place to live, which is what we have. So if I took all of those growth projects together, and I was just going to summarize how much our hospital has grown, just to put this in perspective, and I'm only going to go back to the year 2011. In the year 2011, when we put our plans together, we had 1,900 employees. As of this morning, we have 3,267 employees, 400 physicians and providers, and 250 volunteers. We currently, as of this morning, have 210 job vacancies and are still recruiting. The average salary of a Kootenai Health employee is $62,000 a year, so these are higher wage positions. As Kootenai Health grows, there is a multiplier effect in the community, and it ripples out into other industries. 78% of all of our employees are female. Many or most are mothers. And so it's a real strong support network for our broader community also. This year we'll see anywhere between 350 and 400,000 patient visits to Kootenai Health. 1/3 of those patients are from outside of Kootenai County. And so literally every day we have patients traveling from Bonners Ferry, Moscow, Grangeville, Cottonwood, Kellogg to come to Kootenai Health for services that they don't have available in their community. And what has occurred over the years now is that we're the 3rd largest hospital in the state of Idaho, and so other communities and other organizations are looking to us for specialty care. And so, for example, this year we'll do somewhere between 275 to 300 open heart surgeries. We do brain surgeries. Essentially, the only thing that we don't do at Kootenai Health is burns, transplants, and certain pediatric subspecialties because we don't have the population to support that. But otherwise, we're a completely full service, independent, community-owned hospital. So as a result of all of that growth, we're now experiencing some challenges. And you will now see in our community that some of the historical growth that might have occurred by the hospital in terms of medical facilities is spilling down into the Riverstone area. And what we're experiencing closer to the hospital campus is, in addition to traffic and transportation count issues, we have some issues associated with lack of access to real estate for other developments and future growth. There's a lack of amenities in the area. Pedestrian traffic and bicycle use is really limited because of the transportation issues there. There's a lack of senior housing around the hospital. Some communities would look at this and say that Kootenai Health could become a platform for economic development and job growth, because if you look at projections for our county in terms of population projections, our growth rate in this community is at 2 to 2.5% a year, which is much greater than the national population growth rate for the United States. And many of the individuals that are moving here are seniors. After they discover what a wonderful community it is and all the amenities that we have, the very next thing on their checklist is healthcare. And so they want to know that we have a growing, stable, high-quality healthcare organization in order to make the commitment to live in our community. So in some ways, the healthcare campus becomes not only an economic development platform for growth, but it becomes a real magnet to attract many people that want to move to this region and community that are seeking healthcare. So with that, we really appreciate your interest in this part of our community. We really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this workshop. And we did go ahead previously and invest in a Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Panel study. And there are recommendations that came out of that. Mike Kennedy's going to kind of review that process. But mostly, thank you very much for your consideration of this important need.
John, I just have a question or two I need to ask while it's still here. We may not see you again. So in the hospital world, it sounds like a business to me. It sounds like we're competing. We have to do everything. Is that kind of how you guys look at it?
So, you know, in North Idaho, I think one of the values that exist in this region, not just Coeur d'Alene or Kootenai County, is people value independence. In the entire United States, there are 5,000 hospitals. In the entire United States, how many community-owned independent hospitals are left of our size? 51. It's worth fighting for. If we don't grow, we can't attract physicians, and if we don't have physicians, we can't keep patients closer to home. If we don't have that, we can't remain community-owned and independent. So it fits very well with the values and culture of our region.
Guys, any quick ones to
Just had a
John while
quick
he's
one.
here?
Just one quick one. Sure. Thank you. That was a great presentation. Do you have you had got any statistics on the success rate of the residency program that was started? Are those physicians staying?
Yeah. So the national standard for residency program retention is 50%. We've only had 2 graduating classes because it's a 3-year program. Okay. So in the first year we had 2 stay, and in the second year we had 3 stay. So pretty short time horizon, but you know, we're
on
pretty
an
close
incline,
to that.
so
Yeah.
okay.
And we are currently, I checked this morning, we currently have 22 physician searches underway for physicians in all different specialties. Neurology, gastroenterology, cardiology, vascular surgery, infectious disease, et cetera. And I participate in some of those physician interviews. This is a great story for physicians. Community-owned, independent hospital, stable, wonderful place to live, growing population. It's a really good practice environment. So it's a good story.
Thanks, John.
John, one more question, sorry. What impact does the schools have on your ability to hire new physicians?
Schools? So when we bring physicians in from other communities to interview, if they have children, they always participate in going to the schools, seeing them. Sometimes they'll speak with you know, principals, teachers at the school. It's a pretty important factor. You know, physicians obviously are very, very focused on education. They've done well themselves. And so the ability to communicate with them that we have excellent schools here is actually critically important.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Mike Kennedy, welcome.
Welcome. Put that down. Good evening, Council. My name is Mike Kennedy, and Woody, you have improved the position of Council President a lot from the last guy that held that job, I'm here to tell you. I'm going to move some slides around here. I am representing Coeur d'Alene 2030. After 4 years of no involvement, I was recruited back to join on a volunteer basis the 2030 board last year, and I'm happy to be there because so many of the things that you all put in place and that you all have asked for are coming to fruition through this organization. One of the criticisms that you face and that we faced and that every elected official faces is you guys don't plan enough, you don't look forward enough, you don't think that through. And John Ness mentioned John Richards, who passed away just 2 weeks ago. We should remember his vision in this. But we're looking at this for the future as we go through. So 2030, in the year 2014, you all adopted the implementation plan for 2030, which was a product of thousands of meetings, of interviews with people, conversations with folks, surveys, scientific and community-related surveys, to focus on the values, the challenges and trends, 20-some years hence, the vision and how to implement these strategies for Coeur d'Alene. They came under 6 key themes. They are community and identity, education and learning, environment and recreation, growth and development, health and safety, and jobs and the economy. And in 2014 in June, the resolution that you all, I think, Dan, you might have been the only one that wasn't here, but you all voted on to support the resolution for this, to accept the vision statement, the strategies, and the implementation plan. One of the items in that plan was item 6.7 in the growth and development, talking about the health corridor.
And the idea was that this implementation item supported the establishment of a Coeur d'Alene health corridor from US 95 to Northwest Boulevard along Ironwood Drive to support needed expansion of medical services and associated medical businesses. That's in this document here, which is the 2017 update, which hopefully all of you have a copy of. I took yellow stickies to note all the places in the plan that are impacted by this particular project. And we can go over those later. I don't need to make the case any better than John Ness can about the growth in jobs. I happen to know that Brad Marshall of JUB is here. He's also the current chair of Coeur d'Alene Economic Development Council, Jobs Plus. And if you told us that there was a chance to get several hundred jobs per year outside of the community or inside the community, he would knock down walls to do that, and they have been, and that's what Kootenai Health spins off regularly. The 2030 supporting action items also in this document, and again, I don't know if you all have a copy with you, but I know you've had copies given to you if you need it, but all of those areas, employment, living wage employers, business zones, neighborhoods, trails, healthcare, high demand medical services, all of these items are impacted by the concept of a health corridor, which will allow the hospital to grow in the ways that they need to and the way that we need them to. Key among those in this discussion are the competition with Spokane for talent. Those of us in business who are hiring in maybe the hottest job market in our memory recognize that it is hard to keep up and compete in a larger metropolitan area when we're trying to find the best talent here. The hospital and Coeur d'Alene 2030 recognize that partnerships and economic development incentives are part of that mix, and Woody, your question is absolutely right. It may feel like hospitals shouldn't compete, they're for the good of people. Well, the reality is the industry's changing tremendously and trying to stay ahead of that. The project that you all worked on with the hospital on Ironwood, I had same reference. Brad Marshall of JUB was also an engineer who worked on that, and he likened it to that project was a bit of a stent, and what was perhaps needed over time is a full bypass to be able to make sure that the heart of the hospital keeps beating as it needs to. It buys us time, which is great, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problem. So this is why 2030 is involved. We are a facilitator. We have a board of volunteer members representing a number of private, public, and nonprofits. Amy Evans is your representative on the board, and we have folks from across the spectrum, and not just in the city, but around the area to make it a greater Coeur d'Alene project. So in last year, the hospital approached 2030 about the possibility of working on a visioning program that would be, oh, is this moving on its own? I think it might be. Or I moved it. The visioning program that would allow us to help them figure out how to grow. Can we stop that automatically going, Hillary? Let me go page back it up.
Gridley's the expert.
Yeah. With all due respect, I don't want Gridley touching this technology.
Right. Somehow it seems like it skipped to something else.
The Urban Land Institute is a nonprofit group that works around the country to bring in ideas and to trade best practices around the country. Coeur d'Alene has a history. They have used the Urban Land Institute on other projects in the past. They essentially, what you can do is access what's called a technical advisory panel, and they bring in experts from around the community, around the region. Sometimes they go as far as cross-country. We had that in the Mayor's Institute some years ago. Woody, you did a show on that on the TV show regarding the Mayor's Institute, where they brought in experts from around. And so what this particular technical advisory panel was focused on was just the health corridor area. And it doesn't have defined boundaries, although you saw the maps up there, basically the health care in that area, the corner of 95 and 90. And they asked questions like, what are the realistic ideas for the future of this corridor? What are the opportunities and challenges for realizing those ideas? And what are the strategic actions needed to be taken to overcome some of the obstacles and keep this important, critical element of the community moving forward? So as you can see in the slide, ULI is an organization that has 40,000 folks, and we work within the Idaho and Montana Council there. These are the members of the technical assistance panel that came in. There were 7 of them, and we went outbound, 2030 and the ULI went outbound to 90 community groups and organizations, and we get active input and participation in meetings and review sessions from 43 of those organizations. So it was a pretty pretty good cross-section of the community that we went out to learn from, to hear from, and for them to understand what the values and needs are for this particular project. They came back with recommendations, and there are 6 of them up on the screen: vision, branding, transportation system, real estate opportunities, supportive land uses, neighborhood stabilization, and implementation. As John said, and I'm going to say it even more strongly, the current situation is hindering progress in that area because there are a number of people that are waiting for something to happen, and thus nothing is happening without some impetus and some attention and focus and planning. The growth of the hospital is not going to go down. We need to plan for it for the future. Some of the specifics that the ULI TAP said, and again, all of these are greatly outlined in your documents, which I think you all have a copy of up there. And if anybody's watching this and would like, they can go to the 2030 website and get a copy of all of these resources via PDF. I checked this morning, cda2030.org. There's a page called Resources, and it's all there, and you could download those. But some of the specifics that the ULI implored, encouraged, recommended, suggested us to do as a community, not just you as the city, but us as a community, is to work on land assembly, because it's a patchwork of ownership down there. Some of folks who which want to sell, some folks who maybe don't want to sell until the price gets up somewhere. It's not a clean place to which you can plan for the future. Critical need for a parking structure. The hospital has one, but it's often filled or busy. Long-term, looking 20 years out, that needs to be improved. The possibility of an overpass. This is something that KMPO, an organization that you are very familiar with, and you actually have a representative. Who's your KMPO representative, Dan? Glenn Miles of the KMPO brought the idea that in order to keep that health corridor healthy and growing, there might be a need for an overpass onto Appleway to get some of the traffic flow out and about so that it isn't really just a congested area for the future. The ULI recommended zoning to address the transition areas in the area and important things that are less costly, but signage and wayfinding and neighborhood improvements and that sort of things that make the campus walkable and able to be used for the future. The technical advisory panel had suggestions, structure for an implementation process, and it includes the items that are up on the screen. I don't need to read them to you, but I will tell you that the goals, as I read them and as I am empowered by the board of 2030 to translate to you, to transmit to you, is that these are jobs, this is vision, and this is planning. We're trying to get ahead of the growth that's already here and make sure that that stent holds while we build bypasses and make the communication, make the whole area effectively functioning. The details of this: increasing the connectivity, reducing the congestion, senior housing, skilled nursing, neighborhood stabilization. I've mentioned those before, but they're all part of this implementation process. And it takes the 4 things on that platform: vision, planning, leadership, and key investments. And it didn't just come with the suggested process. They suggested and looked at the Idaho code and looked at our community to find what potential organization models could work for this sort of a project. There are 8 of them that were listed here. Some of them are already working, but not as structured as we would want. Some of them are not in place right now. There's been no discussion or no formal thoughts about a business improvement district, but it's an option. And then, of course, there are those that are, let's just wait until something happens, opportunistic models. All of these proposed planning and organizational structures are legitimate, need review, and they don't necessarily work. You don't just choose one and leave the others. They're all necessarily potentially involved. But some are more powerful than others and can move the process along faster, because at a 2.5% growth rate, with the job increases like John Ness just laid out, we are behind the curve already, it feels, to try to keep up with the growth that's happening in our community and to try to maintain that for the population. So the Coeur d'Alene 2030 board has a working group on this health corridor idea, as we do on the Performing Arts Center. Thank you for your support and involvement with that, as we do on the education projects we do, opening books, opening doors. So 2030 is involved in a lot of things. This is one piece of what this volunteer board does. But we're here to facilitate planning and exploration and ideas on this project. So in light of last council meeting, we listened to the debate and the discussion which you all had, and we appreciated that. This was a great opportunity to come and talk about why 2030, why the hospital, why urban renewal, why all the other things. And so what I'd like to do, and what 2030 absolutely supports, and we have some board members here, is encouraging the eligibility report for one of these options, one of these organization models, which is an urban renewal district. Of all the things in the Idaho Code, it is the strongest locally controlled tool for economic development that the Idaho legislature allows you as cities and us as communities to go with. So I don't need much more. I think Hillary's going to talk next steps, and then the interesting part of this is the discussion with John Ness, not me, but he's going to be back for questions, and I would also stand for any, if you have any, after Hillary's finished. Okay?
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Hillary, you're going to wrap it up, huh?
I am.
You were taking notes?
That's right. I have been taking some notes. So you've heard a lot of great things, I hope, that help provide a little more perspective on all the efforts that have been taking place in and around the health corridor, kind of the visioning, master planning, the traffic improvements, and all of that. And I think, you know, what I'll reiterate some of the things I said when I was before you in June, and that's, you know, we really are trying to explore, is urban renewal even viable or not for this area? And an eligibility report is the first step in that process. It doesn't commit you to form an urban renewal district. If the eligibility report comes back and says it is eligible, or maybe the size needs to be shrunk, or has kind of some different parameters saying maybe it doesn't meet some of the criteria, then I think it could be reevaluated. If it does say it's eligible, then we'll come back to council. Council will then make a determination to say yes, move forward with an urban renewal plan for the area. You can change the boundaries, and the urban renewal plan will include that master planning effort and the financial feasibility, which is really kind of that number crunching like we're doing on Atlas at this time. So it really is kind of the first step. A lot of things can change, and I know there's been some discussion and kind of questioning, like, how does this qualify as an urban renewal district? And there are different types of projects that qualify under the Idaho Code, and so it doesn't have to just be a blighted mill site. You can do urban renewal districts in areas like this where there's traffic inefficiencies, there's a need for economic development or redevelopment, there's some buildings that, you know, they're no longer efficient. There's a need for things like an overpass, you know, parking structure. Those kinds of things are great ways for urban renewal to come in and help aid with some higher cost improvements in the city. And one of the things we've been looking at when we were talking about even East Sherman for urban renewal is not just saying it's just one tool. It's saying, you know, urban renewal probably should work in conjunction with an LID and a BID and some grant funds. We've looked at some kind of, is it possible for any of these sites, Atlas site, Health Corridor, or East Sherman, to qualify for the Tiger grants, or federal funds. It's now called Build grants. They're very, very competitive. They're hard to get. But if you have urban renewal in place and you have some other investments in place, you're more competitive if you have these kind of partnerships. So it's really important to kind of just explore all the opportunities for what is available. So as I talked about in June, the eligibility report, it takes a couple months to complete it. The shelf life is about 2 to 3 years, and so you can kind of, you know, if the decision's not right to be made on should we move forward with an urban renewal district yet, you can kind of sit on it for a little bit. So I think that's really critical. And then I wanted to mention, too, that Kootenai Health and their partners have heard the council, and there was some concern in June about funding, contributing some funds to the eligibility report. And so they brought some other private funders to the table, and so there's not a request for a city to contribute any funds to an eligibility report. It's more just a request this evening to support the effort moving forward. And so here's the requested motion on the screen, and that really is just, we're asking council to support Kootenai Health and other community partners in moving forward with this eligibility report for the health corridor to evaluate the possible urban renewal district per the Urban Land Institute's TAP report recommendation. And so that's the motion we're asking for, and then now we have that opportunity for questions and answers.
So Hillary, you just answered my question, and that was clarification on the funding for the report. So I appreciate that, and with that, I'll pass it over to Dan. But you checked the big box, so thank you.
Thank you,
and
Amy.
Dan, before you start, if I may also, Tony Burns is also here from Ignite CDA, so if there's any questions about the eligibility report or how that works with the urban renewal plan, in addition to the other people I mentioned earlier, I'm sure he'd be happy to come up and answer.
Why don't you go then?
Go.
I swooped on Dan just because my questions are probably shorter and easier. That one slide, the last one that was up there on the ULI TAP organization models,
Yes.
is that in a priority order of how that would be looked at, or were those just?
That is not. That came straight from the document that all of you
Okay.
have. And
It's
what
not
they
in
did
priority of how
there-
they could be utilized?
it's
They're just
not at
models
all.
that can be utilized? Okay.
And on each of those, they gave the pros and cons. And so the group that Mike Kennedy talked about, there's kind of this working group that's been talking about this project and working with some of the Kootenai Health and other partners up there, kind of looked at, each of those different models and how maybe, this really wouldn't just fall under one. We talked about some other things where we're probably going to also have to have, the city's going to have to help out with some zoning. There's going to be a need for maybe an overlay zoning district. There's going to be a need for wayfinding signage. And so some things could be bigger ticket items that are urban renewal, and some things might not be. They might be just funded by the businesses up there. They might be something that city staff has to do. So we kind of looked at all of these, but it's critical right now to kind of, it's like a stop or go decision for urban renewal. We can look at this and say, should we or should we not, just see, is it even a possibility?
And I guess that's my second question, is that according to the timelines you're talking about, it'd be 6 months to complete the report. It could not be, an urban renewal district would take, I believe, a number of months to even be formed. And this report would have a shelf life of about 2 to 3 years before that decision would have to be made. So this could be a 4-year out
It could be.
process
Right.
if it was determined by a future council that an urban renewal district was the way to go, or this council, depending on. It could be 4 years until that occurred.
Right, so even for Atlas, as an example, we started on that about a year ago, right? And so we're not going to have that new district formed until the end of this year. So
Okay.
it takes a little bit of time.
Okay.
So, Mr.
Thank
Lucan.
you. I have some questions. Hillary, you mentioned a non-efficient building. What's a non-efficient building?
Well, I'm sure John Ness could speak to this a lot more eloquently than me, but in the medical industry, the changing technologies in buildings and kind of the need for the telemedicine and kind of the efficiencies of the internet, and I think even just how buildings are constructed, operating rooms, surgical rooms, outpatient, things like that. I think there's a lot of buildings up there that have probably outlived their useful life as medical facilities, and so depending on how they could be repurposed, some of the buildings in the health corridor probably need to be demolished and rebuilt. They could also potentially build them higher if there was a parking structure, so there could be more efficiencies like we're seeing downtown with infill development. Oftentimes you can go higher because land costs so much, and to meet the needs of some of these facilities with the parking demands, you take up a lot of your site if you're having to put more parking on there. So I think those kinds of things, and I'm sure John Ness would be happy to answer questions about the actual facilities up in the corridor.
Another question I had was something that Mr. Kennedy said, and he mentioned 3 items. One was a parking structure, which I heard about. The other one is the bridge, the overpass at Julia,
Right.
which I've heard about, and I can get that on the tip for a build grant. I mean,
Great.
I'll be happy to do that. But the other item was land assembly. What's land assembly?
So acquiring properties, so kind of,
Who would be acquiring the properties?
that, it depends. So if it was under urban renewal has the authority to help go in and acquire certain properties, but there
Or
could also be,
remediation.
it could also happen on their own. So it's something where, so We've talked about if there's blighted properties, for example, like on East Sherman, we looked at that. If there was an urban renewal district and we designate a blighted area, there we could actually go in and you could acquire a property for, say, a parking structure or a parking lot.
But you said earlier this wasn't a blighted area.
This one is not. I'm just giving you an example of when you
Okay.
can go in and buy a property. I'm sure Tony could answer all the other laws on urban renewal for purchasing property, but that is one of their tools. As you know, I mean, purchasing Tubbs Hill and some of these other properties that are not blighted. It's in the public good and economic development.
Okay. That's probably all the questions I would have for you. I
Okay.
think Dan has to ask some really complicated questions now.
Probably not, but, so, first off, the funding, I mean, that's how, so we're not being asked to fund this.
Correct.
Okay, the study. Then I guess in terms of drilling down the heart of what we're being asked to approve, is it in, similar to like a letter of recommendation level of things, or I'm aware of some, government grant process where the local entity has to actually formally give their blessing. So is this just general support of it, or is it something that is necessary, our formal action, to go to this next step, which, I'm of the spot that this, makes sense to go to the next logical step, but what do you really need from us?
I believe, and I'm going to have Tony clarify this, but my understanding is the eligibility report can take place irregardless of council deciding to move forward on that. It's the next step that the council has to bless and say, yes, I authorize you to move forward with the urban renewal plan, which is the master planning and financial feasibility. So I think it's a courtesy to be before you to ask for your kind of blessing to move forward. But if I'm incorrect, I would like for Tony to please clarify
I think
that.
Mr. Kennedy wants to say something.
Okay.
I just had a quick point on that. The idea in the work group was that because there was some question about communication and information flow the last time, frankly, as chairman of 2030, I thought it important that the hospital see support from their city council and vice versa, that they are here to talk to you about it. So while the funding issue, which was raised by a number of folks, and the hospital decided that could be done in 2030, is not putting any money in it, but we certainly have some members that want to contribute privately. The idea was to show support to the hospital as they endure or go through their constant master planning process to make sure that they have enough space. And so we really wanted it as a show of faith and support on behalf of the city. So.
That was a great question, Dan, and I think that is important because now that we're not funding it, seriously, the hospital could approach the Urban Renewal Agency, just like anyone can, to petition them for a district. But I do have something to point out to council that I'd like us to be mindful of. This is in the report that was provided to us, and if you turn to the page, and there are no page numbers, future reference page numbers, there's a section on urban renewal in the back that talks about the strengths and weaknesses of urban renewal as a funding source for this. And I just want you to know that the phrase politics or political is mentioned 3 times in that area. This is a political hot potato. Urban renewal in this area has been controversial for over a decade. And if this process is going to move forward with an urban renewal agency, a priority on an urban renewal agency as opposed to an LID or a BID, that it is going to be political, which means it's going to come back up here, which means next election time there's going to be questions and candidates who are going to make it an issue. So it is political. No other source here of funding, of all the sources listed, and there are 8 of them, no other source mentions the word politics or political at all. The other concern I have, and this is for the hospital and those supporting this, is that tax increment financing, which is what you're talking about, is a very gradual way to fund. It takes a while to build it up. The hospital district, this area, is already built out. It's pretty much constructed, which means that your increment will be very slow in coming. It's going to take a while to build it up. Downtown district was created in 97. That was a downturn for the economy. It took a while for the economy to heat up again. Remember the dot-com crash? That happened right around that time. And it wasn't until about, I don't know, 2003, 2004, that the Urban Renewal Agency, so it had already been online for about 6 or 7 years, when they started to have some money and be able to do projects. So this is a gradual type of funding. And if you're eager to do things quickly, I would strongly suggest an LID and looking into that instead. If you also look in the report, and this is the second to last page, so it doesn't have a page number, they list the, this is where the idea for doing urban renewal is, so they weigh each of the funding modules. And Urban Renewal Agency came in first with a rank of 17. They didn't total the numbers, so I totaled the numbers. And the BID came in second with 16. And the key items that were the difference between the two funding sources were leveraging resources, cost-effective, and sustainability. I also just want to say, from a political standpoint, one of the major concerns I have about urban renewal is eminent domain. And that's that cities have this ability. I don't know if a hospital district does or not. I know a hospital district can bond and a hospital district can tax. But a city can go through the process of eminent domain, which is condemning properties. And our Supreme Court in this country has decided that condemning properties to improve property taxes is a valid use. And I don't know if our state legislature overruled that or not, or tried to get around it, but it is, the Supreme Court did decide that. And urban renewal agencies also have the power of eminent domain. And there are 400 homes in this area, and a lot of these homes have people who are not exceptionally wealthy. Affordable housing was mentioned in this report. And it would be, again, a political hot potato if an urban renewal district was created and eminent domain was used to condemn these houses so that something else could be put in its place to generate more property taxes. And I tell you what, you want to clean out a city council, that's a great way to do it. So those are my words of warning regarding this process and urban renewal.
Can we talk to Tony for a little bit?
Yes.
Thanks for coming. Sure. A couple questions I have in regards to land acquisitions. I mean, you've been through a few of them. I'm thinking of Midtown. We seem to have accumulated some land, we put in a parking lot, and then we kind of got stuck with this dirt. What's your perspective on that, and what did we learn there that might apply to a new hospital district?
Well, we've done land assemblage in several areas. The parking garage is a fine example of where we assembled properties, and we're building that. And over on North Park Drive, we assembled those properties to help with the creation of the additional park area and our new subdivision. So it's a good tool to have when it's needed, and it adds value when it works well with other partners and other stakeholders. So it's just another tool in the tool chest.
Eminent domain, I don't think, I come from an older school of counsel, and I was counseled that that was never even to be considered in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, from the old school. Is that a tool you guys have?
It is, as Councilman Gukin said, it is a tool in our tool chest, just like it's in yours. My board has never, ever considered using it, and I doubt that they ever will. We don't see a need for that. We've assembled property over the past X amount of years in our Lake District. Without having to do that, we buy at market rate, we negotiate with people, we never come in with a hammer.
The other question I think Mr. Gukin asked it last time, and I was surprised, was we're kind of killing it right now. We're booming, we're in another upswing, everything's expensive, people's houses, and yet I'm hearing that the property in that potential area is not of value. How am I missing something there?
It's not of value?
Well, they're saying this is a good time to purchase it because it's affordable. And I don't see anything affordable around here.
Well, affordable is pretty relative. I mean, it could be, it might be cheaper now than it might be next year, but it really depends on the market. You know, the old adage, are we in the bottom of the 7th inning in the real estate market? Are we in the top of the 9th? When's the next cycle going to happen? Because it is cyclic. It will happen. And then if it does happen, how deep will it go? Will it go real deep? Will it just be a little dip in the market? We don't know, but you have to be poised to take care of opportunities and partner with stakeholders and people that want to add value to an area that they're talking about up there.
And could you talk just a little bit about the increment, about Mr. Gookin's comment that it's going to take some time to build it, and is that another one, like you would project it at 25-year?
Well, the maximum goes 20 years.
Yeah.
You would look for catalytic project areas. One idea, I mean, it was in the study areas like the Wildwater area. You know, that was dilapidated, deteriorated area. Now they've leveled it. Something's going to happen there. Maybe it's going to be something good. So you want to kind of partner with those opportunities when you can. There might be some other catalytic areas we might not be quite familiar with at this time, but that's what you jumpstart and get increment going. But it does take time to build up.
Thanks, Tony. Any questions?
Yeah, Tony, as long as you're here, explain to me the overlap. How does that work? So I always thought when a district closed, and if the area that's, and it's West Emma, if that area is already in a district, can it be put into another district immediately after the?
Well, I think the strategy would be if a new area is formed that you saw on the map for a Kootenai, we'll just say a health corridor area, call it a health district, that while the Lake District is still viable, that one parcel could be de-annexed from the Lake District and included in a new district. There's no problem with doing that.
I didn't know if you could do that. I always thought once a district closed that no part of the
I'm
district.
saying while it's still open, we got 3-4 years left. Well, we got till 2021 before the Lake District closes. So if this district were getting up and established prior to that, you could de-annex and annex in.
But wouldn't that create a situation where urban renewal could never really end, that you could simply create a district,
No.
de-annex it, create a new district?
No, the Lake District ends in 2021.
Right,
Say the health district is formed in 2020.
okay,
So you would take that one parcel that's identified, de-annex it from the Lake District, put it in the Health District. Lake District closes in 2021, and that one parcel would just stay within the new district because it has, they're targeting it because it has zero value right now. It's the project that's supposed to be the hotel up there that the developer wants more time to develop. So that's the strategy, that he might not be able to deploy that project prior to 2021, so that's the strategy. Doesn't need to happen, it might not happen, but
yeah, I
that's the idea.
would check with your attorney to make sure that the code does allow that, because there is a stipulation that a revenue allocation area has a 20-year cap, and I don't know if that would satisfy the code or not. I don't even know if it's been done elsewhere in the state. That would be a good indicator.
Okay.
Dan, you have a question?
Sure. Well, just speaking as the alternative, Dan, that I
Dan?
don't, I guess any talk of eminent domain and all of that is just, I think that, I suppose a lot of things are possible, but that is so improbable to not, I guess in my mind, be relevant to it, because it could happen. But otherwise, I guess it seems like what we're being, and as far as the political hot potato, I suppose it could, but I guess about the last reason I would want to avoid dealing with some issue is because it might be a political hot potato, so that, kind of comes with the territory. And I think there's a lot of potential benefits, but we won't know until they take an objective look at it. So while it's not, sounds like it's not necessary for us to make a decision for money, I guess when we're at the point, I certainly would feel comfortable saying, but I think it is worthwhile that we, put our mark on the ground that we're in favor of this process, at least going to the next logical step.
And just if I can add one comment to previous comments, I think it's critical to have this conversation with City Council at this time, because the eligibility report is going to come back to you to adopt, and then you're going to be the decision-making body about whether an urban renewal district ever gets formed, the plans to develop a feasibility study. So everything comes back to you. So you have to be in alignment with this process from the get-go, from now. If there's an issue that you don't want to do this, that needs to be decided now so other venues can be explored. So it's very critical that this conversation is happening now.
I would like to think that you were always exploring all the opportunities, that the hospital in this area, the interested parties would be looking at all their options.
And I might just, from my personal standpoint, I might just add that an LID, I think, might be political too. I think when you ask people if they want to tax themselves, I think that could get political.
It was last time.
James?
I am ready to make a motion if we're out of questions.
Any other comments for anybody? I would just like to say to John and all you guys, I think the reason we're here is, at least for me, it was, we didn't know this was happening. It was like, came out of left wing. So I think the reality of what you guys have accomplished and what you're doing, I guess I always expected to walk into a hospital and not feel like I'm in a hotel. I was looking for the bar. I thought there has to be a cocktail lounge there somewhere because it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And people having private rooms in hospitals kind of freak me out. I go, why would you want a private room? I don't want to be here, right? You don't go to a hospital to hang out. But you guys have approached it differently, and obviously you're successful. And there's a lot of good people around it, and doctors are cool. They're cool to talk to, and they have a different perspective on life. So that was kind of my push to try and get you guys to come tell us how is this coming to be? What's the big plan? Because you guys are maxed out over there. What could you possibly do? Well, now I see all these things that you could do, want to do, and you've got the support. And I think council's always, we sort of take you for granted. You're out there just kicking butt. We thank you, you know. So go ahead.
With that, I'd like to make a motion to support Kootenai Health and other community partners moving forward with an eligibility report for the health corridor to evaluate a possible urban renewal district per the Urban Land Institute's TAP report recommendation.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Other comments? Mr. Gookin, you want to leave us with a final word?
I would just hope that, that if you do the report, that you would have the Panhandle Area Council do it. That's kind of what they were designed to do.
Anything else?
I just appreciate this information and the fact that you found funding outside of the city's request. And also, Mike, that you mentioned that the entire ULI package is online, so that if anyone wants to know what's going on, they can take a look at it, read those sections themselves. I think that's really important, and I'm sure this eligibility study will include public input and gathering more of that. So I'm in favor of it, and I appreciate the broad scope of information presented tonight.
And with that, look for all those in favor.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
One no. With that, we carry it, and we are going to go into a 10-minute recess, and we thank you guys. Appreciate y'all coming out.